Some betrayals don't come with a knife. Mine came with a phone call from my own son on a Tuesday morning. While I was drinking coffee on a porch, he thought he'd already taken from me. He was wrong. The phone rang at exactly 8:14 a.m. Tyler's name flashed on the screen. I answered. Without a single breath of maternal warmth, his voice came through, cold and rehearsed. "Mom, we've made an executive decision. We're listing the cabin. You need to be out of the property by Friday." The sheer blindness of his greed was shocking. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. When the line went dead at 8:15 a.m., I didn't scream, and I certainly didn't cry. Tears are an emotional deficit I refuse to fund. I simply stood there on the cedar deck of the Emerald Ridge cabin, breathing in the sharp Idaho air. The hallway behind me smelled of stale pine needles and a heavy, suffocating silence. Tyler thought he had engineered the perfect corporate takeover of my life, but he forgot that a landscape architect understands how to excavate a faulty foundation long before the structure collapses. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a shred of maternal regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a balance sheet. For 38 years, I had been the silent investor in his version of family, footing the bill for his entitlement while he treated my affection like a non-binding contract. My compassion had been a luxury resource that he and his wife, Madison, had overdrafted for years, but every line of credit has an expiration date, and Tyler had just hit his limit. I turned away from the lake view and walked inside, moving with deliberate precision. I set my cold coffee mug down right next to my late husband's vintage brass surveying Transit. The tarnished metal sat exactly where an apology should have been, a silent reminder of a man who measured boundaries in concrete and steel, not emotional compromises. I ran my fingers over the cold glass of the Transit lens. My husband and I had built a life based on structural integrity, yet our eldest son had grown up believing everything we owned was just an unearned asset waiting to be liquidated. I didn't call him back to argue. I didn't ask why he thought an eviction notice was an acceptable way to treat the mother who raised him. Instead, I opened my laptop directly on the rough porch, railing the screen, casting a pale glow against the morning fog rolling over Hayden Lake. My fingers didn't tremble as I logged into the primary administrative portal for the Hayden Lake Property Maintenance Trust. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting. For the past 3 years, Tyler had used his secondary administrative access to draw from the cabin's maintenance lines under the guise of structural upkeep. In reality, he was secretly funneling those resources into his own unauthorized luxury remodeling projects, preparing the land for a premium buyer. He thought he was playing a high-stakes real estate game, but he didn't realize I owned the board. With 3 precise keystrokes, I revoked his administrative privileges. I locked his user profile, terminated his digital authorization keys, and froze the entire maintenance line. Instantly, the thousands of dollars he had allocated for unauthorized construction crews vanished from his dashboard. By 8:23 a.m., exactly 9 minutes after his disrespectful call, his entire scaffold was completely paralyzed. Inside, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of cold facts, absolute control, and quiet, systematic retribution. They were about to learn that when you stop playing along, the illusion of your compliance shatters into pieces. I close my laptop and look at my hands. They are 72 years old now, lined with the history of this soil. My mind drifts back to the grueling summers of the early 90s. I remember the bitter taste of dust and sweat as I cleared the jagged granite from the foundation of the Emerald Ridge cabin with my bare hands. I can still feel the cold weight of the stones I hauled day after day. Down by the water, Tyler and Hannah played blindly on the dock, laughing, completely oblivious to the physical cost of their sanctuary. I built this place to be an unbreakable harbour, an anchor for our family. I never expected that the boy I carried rocks for would grow up to treat my sweat like free collateral. But human memory is dangerously selective when greed takes the wheel. Years later, after my husband passed, Tyler took a massive gamble on a series of predatory commercial ventures. He miscalculated. His failure didn't just drain his bank accounts. His reckless overreach dragged the entire family estate to the absolute edge of tax foreclosure. He didn't tell me. I found the notices buried under the junk mail, a terrifying debt stamped in red ink. Did I scream? Did I lecture him? No. I silently drove to the bank and liquidated $65,000 of my personal retirement bonds to wipe out his debt in full. I handed him back his survival. I became the invisible investor in his safety, a sacrifice he chose to completely erase from his ledger the moment the local market turned hot. Most people who hear my story ask why I stayed silent for so long. They look at a mother's patience and mistake it for compliance. They wonder why I didn't cut him off the moment he started eyeing my land at holiday dinners. What they don't understand is the deep psychological architecture of a survivor inside a toxic family system. In the dynamics of parental care, silence is rarely submission. It is a structural assessment. As a landscape architect, I have spent my entire life evaluating how shifting terrain reacts under extreme weight. I knew the invisible chains of maternal obligation had turned into a transactional prison, but I refused to break them until the baseline data was irrefutable. My initial silence wasn't weakness. It was the clinical patience of a strategist tracking an unstable foundation. I was simply waiting for the load-bearing capacity of Tyler's entitlement to reach its absolute breaking point. I let him believe he was running the game. I let him sign unauthorized listings and smile his arrogant corporate smiles because I needed the structural decay of his character to be fully documented, legally exposed, and undeniable. Every casual cruelty, every dismissive comment about my age, it was all just data. A pattern of behavior being mapped out on a blueprint of his own making. The invisible chain didn't snap by accident. It was dismantled by meticulous design. The survey was now complete, the calculations were locked, and it was time to let the walls cave in. The silence didn't last. Entitlement never quiets down when it loses access to the vault. It gets loud, vicious, and frantic. By afternoon, the morning fog had cleared from Hayden Lake, leaving the water looking like grey sheet metal under a winter sky. Inside my head, Tyler's words from that 8:14 call were still echoing. I didn't reach for the phone to check the damage. The heavy black device just sat on the kitchen counter, a cold piece of plastic vibrating rhythmically against the solid oak wood. It was a digital bong going off in a house that used to be a sanctuary. 7 missed calls turned into 14. Then the voicemails began to pile up, each one a masterclass in psychological coercion. Tyler's corporate confidence had dissolved, replaced by a sharp edge disguised as deep medical concern. I pressed play, letting his rehearsed malice fill the quiet kitchen. "Mom, you're clearly not remembering our agreements," his voice echoed. "We think the isolation up at Hayden Lake is getting to you. You're acting erratically, freezing accounts. Your cognitive health isn't what it used to be, and frankly, Hannah and I are worried you can't make reliable decisions on your own anymore." There it was, the textbook gaslighting weapon of a corporate climber. When he can't bully you into submission, he tries to rewrite your sanity. He wanted to construct a narrative where a 72-year-old retired architect was simply losing her mind, because a mental deficiency is easier to sell to a real estate broker than a mother who simply stood her ground. He wasn't trying to protect my health. He was weaponizing a desperate bluff, threatening a long court battle to declare me incompetent, hoping the sheer panic would force me to sign the papers before Monday morning. But Tyler wasn't operating alone. His image-obsessed wife, Madison, decided to take the execution into the court of public opinion. My younger daughter, Hannah, functioning as Tyler's submissive echo, forwarded a screenshot to my phone without a word. It was a pristine photo on Madison's social media feed, a sunlit glimpse of their high-end townhouse, showing off premium marble countertops. The caption beneath it was a weaponized piece of emotional blackmail. Some people forget who raised them. It is truly heartbreaking when elderly parents choose bitter isolation and pride over supporting the future of their own children. I stared at that glowing rectangle, the pixelated display sitting exactly where their remorse should have been. They believed public shame would break my resolve. They thought I would crumble and sign the Hayden Lake paperwork just to keep the family facade pristine. They expected me to shrink to accommodate their lifestyle. They completely miscalculated the landscape. Public hostility doesn't make me hide. It clears my sightline. It greenlights the transition from personal restraint to cold, systematic execution. They had poured gasoline on the entire ridge. I picked up the phone and dialed an old office line in downtown Coeur d'Alene. It was time to introduce them to reality. I stopped looking at my phone altogether. I left the device face down on the cedar railing, letting it run out of battery in the cold afternoon breeze. The emotional noise of family drama was officially closed. It was time to shift this dispute from a messy family argument into an objective corporate strategy. This wasn't a maternal crisis anymore. It was a hostile takeover attempt, and I was about to execute an ironclad defense. The drive into downtown Coeur d'Alene took exactly 35 minutes. The city streets smelled of melting slush and crisp, pine-tinted asphalt. I pulled up outside a modern granite office building and walked directly to the elevator, my leather boots making sharp, rhythmic clicks on the marble floor. I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel a single trace of hesitation. My posture was straight, balanced, and perfectly aligned, just like the structural grade lines of a well-planned retaining wall. Raymond Castillo was already waiting for me in his corner office on the 4th floor. At 49 years old, Raymond was the sharpest real estate and estate mind in Kootenai County. He was a third-generation attorney who viewed complex title disputes the way a grandmaster analyzes an unstable chessboard with cold, clinical precision and a quiet appreciation for a well-timed legal trap. He didn't offer empty platitudes or generic condolences. He simply opened a leather portfolio, uncapped a fountain pen, and pointed to the mahogany table. "Lay it out, Laura," he said calmly. I placed my files on the table with absolute precision. I stacked the original deed records for the Hayden Lake property right next to the bank statements, proving I had paid $65,000 in back taxes out of my own retirement security. I showed him the printouts of Tyler's unauthorized listing agreement with Mark Benson, the real estate agent from Post Falls. Raymond leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steeled, his eyes scanning the documents like an inspector reviewing a structural defect report. "Your son entered into a purchase contract on a property he lacks the unilateral authority to sell," Raymond muttered, a small, razor-sharp smile forming at the edge of his mouth. "He pushed the sale through to closing by assuring the buyers you would comply at the table, treating your co-ownership as a passive formality. He completely miscalculated the statutory requirements of Idaho real estate law." "I want to let him run all the way to the closing table," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "I want him to promise his buyers a pristine, completed transaction. And then I want the foundation to vanish beneath his feet." Raymond nodded slowly, pulling a fresh sheet of legal pad paper toward him. The corporate machinery was officially in motion. Within 20 minutes, he had drafted a formal, ironclad legal notice addressed directly to Tyler and his brokerage firm. It wasn't a plea for cooperation, it was an ultimatum with teeth. The document gave Tyler and Mark Benson a strict 48-hour window to immediately withdraw the Hayden Lake listing from the market and terminate all active buyer negotiations. If they refused, Raymond was prepared to initiate immediate, public litigation for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The emotional subscription was cancelled. The legal audit had begun. The paper trail doesn't lie, and it doesn't care about family loyalty. 2 days after my visit to Raymond's office, the morning sun was completely blocked by heavy, dark clouds stretching over the city. Inside the legal library, the only sound was the rhythmic whir of the printer dropping pages onto the glass. Raymond's team had done a deep forensic audit on every secondary account tied to the Emerald Ridge Cabin trust lines. I sat in a high-backed leather chair, watching the numbers align on the sheets. This wasn't a family matter anymore. It was an interrogation of cold, digital facts. Raymond suddenly stopped scrolling. He pulled a heavy manila folder from his briefcase and laid a single document flat on the table right under the direct glare of the desk lamp. It was a copy of an auxiliary corporate line of credit tied directly to my maintenance account. The requested funding amount was precisely $45,000. My eyes locked onto the bottom of the page. The signature read Laura Logan, written in smooth, sweeping blue ink. But the architecture of the letters was entirely wrong. The slant of the cursive, the sharp pressure on the loops, it belonged to my son. A sudden memory cut through the coldness of the room. I remembered standing at the kitchen table on Harmon Ridge Road when Tyler was only 7, patiently holding his small hand to guide his pencil across a sheet of lined paper, teaching him how to structure his letters. I had taught him how to write. Now, 3 decades later, he had used that exact same hand to copy my name onto a fraudulent financial commitment. He had stolen $45,000 from my estate to fund Madison's failing private boutique venture, shielding her empty bank accounts from the high-end social circle she desperately craved. This is the tragic delusion of the modern corporate climber. Tyler and Madison had constructed a life entirely out of lease status, an elegant townhouse and premium marble countertops paid for with stolen capital. They believed that throwing money at appearances made them important, projecting an illusion of dominance while their actual balance sheet was completely hollow. But unearned material status is a fragile cage. When an identity is built entirely on a mirage of wealth you haven't earned, you don't just stumble when the market shifts, you shatter completely. My son mistook an overdrafted trust line for actual leverage, entirely forgetting that an artificial facade disintegrates the absolute second it collides with a cold, structural reality. The forgery was the definitive kill shot. It removed any remaining path to redemption, stripping away the final layers of maternal hesitation from my heart. Tyler wasn't just an impatient, greedy child trying to accelerate an estate timeline. He was a criminal who had signed his own indictment. I looked up at Raymond. He quietly closed the folder, the heavy snap of the plastic tab sounding like a gavel hitting a wooden block. The 48-hour window had closed. The real estate closing was scheduled for 9 o'clock Monday morning at the title office. We had everything we needed to bring the entire roof down. The Lakeland Title Company office in Coeur d'Alene was warm, smelling of premium dark roast coffee and expensive leather. Tyler stood near the mahogany table, looking immaculate in his tailored navy jacket. He was smiling that arrogant, unchecked smile of a corporate climber who believed he had successfully pushed his mother out of the blueprint to secure a quick $780,000 payday. Madison sat beside him, nervously adjusting her designer watch. They thought they were checking out. They thought the old woman was a formality. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door clicked open. The smile froze on Tyler's face. I didn't walk in alone. Behind me was Raymond Castillo, carrying his heavy leather briefcase, and right next to him stood a uniformed sheriff's deputy, dispatched to escort us after we filed the official fraud report at the station an hour earlier. The clean corporate room instantly turned into an interrogation. Paula, the title officer, stopped sorting the closing documents. Mark Benson, the real estate agent, lowered his pen, sensing the structural alignment of the room had completely shifted. Raymond didn't waste time on pleasantries. He stepped forward and placed the forensic audit files directly in the center of the table. "This closing is permanently frozen," Raymond announced, his voice slicing through the silence like an alpine wind. He slid the forged corporate line of credit straight toward Tyler's real estate agent. "The sellers lack unilateral approval, and we have filed a formal criminal report for a $45,000 forgery against the estate trust. And Tyler, the California cash buyers you brought to this table are the exact predatory developers who bankrupted your father 15 years ago. You almost sold our sanctuary to his worst historical enemies for a quick commission." The arrogance drained from Tyler's face so fast it looked like a physical injury. Tyler pushed back from the table, his knees buckling as the corporate mirage shattered around him. He fell to his knees right there on the thin office carpet, grabbing at my coat, his voice cracking into something small and desperate. "Mum, please. Madison spent the money. It'll destroy my career. Just sign the papers, please. We can fix this." I looked down at my oldest son, completely unmoved by his theatre. "I already fixed it, Tyler," I said, my voice flat and final. I pulled out the certified trust amendments Raymond had legally executed on Friday afternoon. "Your names were never on the actual deed, Tyler. You and Hannah were merely contingent beneficiaries of the family trust status requiring absolute fiduciary loyalty. The moment Raymond filed the forgery report, your rights were automatically terminated under the trust bylaws. And don't weep in the corner. Hannah, I saw the text messages on Tyler's phone. You knew about this unauthorized listing, and you silently agreed to take a $100,000 cut of his quick payday just to clear your own credit card debts. You weren't a submissive victim under his thumb. You were a silent partner in his greed. You wanted to sell my sanctuary so badly. Now it isn't yours to touch." I let the silence do its work before delivering the final math. "By attempting to force an eviction on land you didn't own, you didn't just lose this cabin," I continued, looking at Tyler and then at Hannah, who sat weeping silently in the corner. "You never knew about the Laura Logan Family Trust. You never knew about the Obsidian Point Lodge on Spirit Lake, an untouched haven facing the western horizon. It was appraised last month at $2,400,000. Tyler stared at me, his chest heaving. "That was going to be your true inheritance." But you got impatient for a short-term split, and you changed the destination entirely. The Spirit Lake Lodge has been legally signed over to a permanent land conservation nonprofit. You threw away millions to grab scraps. I left him to face the $45,000 fraud debt alone. As winter slowly transitions into a quiet spring, I sit on the west-facing porch of the Obsidian Point Lodge, watching the sun turn flat and gold across the open water. I've come to realize that blood relation doesn't guarantee a legacy, and sharing a last name is just biology, not a blueprint for a family. Forgiveness isn't always about repairing a toxic bond. Sometimes it is simply the clinical act of releasing yourself from an ungrateful contract. As a landscape architect, I had to learn the hardest lesson of my career. Sometimes you must stop trying to save a failing structure, step away from the ungrateful foundations of your past, and plant a garden where your bloodline is permanently denied shade, while your true life provides shelter to the world. If you find yourself standing in a similar territory, always remember that you do not need their permission to take up space, and you do not need their validation to be luminous. If this narrative architecture brought you a sense of clarity or validated your own boundaries, hit that like button, subscribe to the Master Channel, and share this video with one person who needs the absolute courage to cut a toxic tie today. Leave your raw thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. See you on the next Master Blueprint.